Hello and welcome to our Leadership Masterclass. Those of you who've logged in expecting a recording of our recent call this morning will be a little bit surprised because we had a small technical issue and that recording doesn't in fact work. So instead, rather than disappointing everybody, we thought we'd do a short summary of the conversations we had and share some of the outcomes from those conversations. I was joined on the call by my colleague Sam or Simon Mann, with whom we had a small interview talking about trust, and we were also joined on the call by a number of our delegates. Now, what did we talk about? We spent some time exploring this idea of the trust equation because, building on our recent webinar around purpose, one of the things leaders can do that really drives purpose is build trust. And this equation has been around for a while, originally coined by David Maister and Hugh Green, but also has been adapted more recently. You'll find some with benevolence in and some of other particular labels, but the basic premise remains the same. In order to be trusted or trustworthy, we have to do a whole bunch of stuff that is on the numerator, on the top of the fraction, and minimize the stuff on the denominator, on the bottom of the fraction. So what have we got? We've got credibility, reliability, intimacy, and self-orientation. Now, if we look at those in turn, credibility is what you say and who you are. So the letters after your name, the research you've done, the degrees and qualifications you have, your deep subject matter expertise. And that gives you credibility in those domains. Reliability, by way of contrast, is what you do. So do you promise things and then deliver on them, or do you promise things and not deliver on them? And when we're talking about trust, people often focus on these two areas or as ways of building trustworthiness because they are rational and they are measurable. If I promise to have you something by Friday and I give it to you by Friday, then I get a tick in the reliability box. If I have more and more letters after my name, I get a tick in the credibility box. That's all well and good, but what the data tells us is that whilst these are rational and measurable, they have the smaller impact on your trustworthiness. As we move along to intimacy, the final element of the top of the fraction, that's a little bit more emotional and a little bit harder to measure. And intimacy here is around how safe do I feel with you? In other words, if I share a confidence with you, if I admit vulnerability to you, if I admit a mistake to you, what do I believe the consequences of that intimacy are going to be? And as you can see, that's a little bit harder to measure. We can't put a tick in the box or a sticker on the wall that says, yes, intimacy achieved. And it's going to build up over time. And like so many things, it's going to be one of those things that could be hard to build and easy to damage. So intimacy, increasing your intimacy with somebody will increase your trustworthiness. Last but not least, we have our bottom half of the fraction, self-orientation. And here, what we need to do, by maths of course, is to lower self-orientation. The lower our self-orientation, the higher the outcome of the fraction. What is self-orientation? In very simple terms, it is the extent to which people think you are out for yourself rather than out for either them or the common good. Now, we all know that selfishness is bad and we can identify and picture selfishness in other people. But self-orientation also includes what some people might describe as self-interest. In other words, am I doing this for me or am I doing this for us? So in order to build trustworthiness, we need to increase the us, increase the we, increase the sense of which we are doing this together rather than individually. At this point in the conversation, I was joined by my colleague Simon Mann, also known as Sam, in case the conversation gets confusing. Sam and I recently attended the Anthropy Gathering down in Devon, where he spoke on trust. So he was the person we went to speak on this from his own personal experience. I asked him a number of questions, which led to a conversation, and he's agreed to summarise his thoughts on those now.
So it's lovely to see everybody. We had a great conversation with the participants, but Iain and I started off discussing how we felt about trust. And one of the first questions that we talked about is thinking about where trust starts. Fundamentally, I believe that if you do what you say you're going to do, and you do the right thing, and you can challenge yourself and test yourself on, have I done what I said I was going to do, and did I do the right thing in this context, then that is a trust building dynamic. I also think that giving people trust, giving people clarity of focus, practicing mission command, and allowing the process of mission command to operate, is a trust building approach in any context. And of course, that doing the right thing, that comes from a value set, and that's about being clear about your own personal values, but also organizational values. And most organizations, I would suggest, have sort of fairly core value offers that they often communicate, and doing the right thing in that context is really important. So trust building comes from values, from that informing how you do the right thing, and then doing what you say you're going to do, delivering on time, or communicating things. If you're not going to be able to do something, let people know, but fundamentally drive that process of delivery and congruence with what you believe in. I also think that purpose is really important, and for me, in conversations that we have, that bringing things back to that purposefulness. What is it that you are trying to achieve? What does a great outcome look like? Because people can buy into that, people can see it, and if you articulate it clearly, it becomes a foundation block of trust. So in the context of the trust equation, we talked about credibility, reliability, intimacy, and self-orientation, and we talked about which of those that I found the hardest in my leadership journey, and I focused on credibility. And that's because I think especially, having been a management consultant for many years, you're constantly trying to learn new situations and understand people's problems in context and add value. You're trying to do the right thing, and you're trying to do what you say you're going to do, which often is delivering purpose-driven outcomes. And that means that you've got to have a really broad skill set and a good problem-solving ability. But at the same time, it's very difficult to look at the standard things that generally give people credibility and understand what that framework might look like. So if it's about qualifications, or is it about experience or expertise, these things vary, and they vary in different circumstances. Quite often, we feel the need to sort of justify our qualifications in order to give us a position in a conversation. So that credibility thing is interesting, I think, in terms of how we form that relationship and how it builds trust. So being credible where you can by demonstrating your expertise and asking great questions that show knowledge and understanding of the topic area, but also being prepared to offer your expertise in the right time. These are great things for building trust, but things that I've focused on heavily. We also talked about the fact that sometimes one can be in a relationship where it's difficult to trust the people in your team. I told a story about a time when I'd worked with a colleague, senior to me, in a hazardous environment, a high safety critical environment, and that person had sadly a problem with alcohol. And it was very, very difficult to know how they'd show up and to be able to trust the decisions they were making. And we as a team had to put in place support mechanisms around that person to deal with that issue, and to look after them, and to recognize that they needed help, but also that we couldn't allow the lack of trust that we had to impact on our operations. So we made sure that we had checks and balances that dealt with our lack of trust in particularly the safety critical incidences. But it clearly happens in many workplaces where you lack confidence in somebody's underpinning credibility, their competence, maybe they're not congruent. They say one thing but do another. Maybe they don't have that element of care for the team, that fabulous notion of sort of being able to look after the team around them and do things in favor of the team, which also builds trust, that lack of self-orientation. So it's important to recognize. It's also important that trust is a two-way street, to coin a phrase, and that we build trust by role modeling those behaviors and asking great questions, and where the trust may be not as good as you'd like it to be, being an effective follower, taking responsibility for the outcome, taking responsibility for clarifying questions and outcomes expected, is all part of trust building. We then went on to talk about the world of AI, and trust is a uniquely human thing. We pick up on trust markers unconsciously all the time. The way in which we feel that people are communicating, the way in which everything from the way in which where they make eye contact to the way in which people are present in a conversation, and the even more subtle cues around voice tonality and so on, all have an impact on the way that we build trust. And regularly now we're seeing situations where AI is mimicking human behavior. I had a conversation with a chatbot from a utility provider day before yesterday, which there were only very subtle cues that indicated that it wasn't a human being, and it's very difficult to trust in some respects that AI, because we don't know that it can be fallible. And we are much more comfortable with trusting people and increasingly people that we recognize have similar traits and behaviors to us. And so looking at AI as having those human characteristics, we can think about trust with AI in the same way. That notion of recognizing that it might be coming from a different perspective, and keeping a good eye out for things that might seem incongruent, that then encourage us to ask different questions and again take responsibility for that trust building piece ourselves. So to wrap up the conversation, we then talked about purpose. And purpose can be a really unifying effect. You may find that you don't necessarily agree with, you don't agree with the decisions that people make, you don't recognize their competence in a context. But if people are well-intentioned and have a shared common purpose, then it's more likely that people will try and overcome any kind of differences and push forward in terms of asking great questions and role modeling good behavior. So in terms of the trust equation and that notion of character, competence, and commitment, these all bring the purpose of an organization or of an individual or of a team into more refined focus and allow us to deliver on better results. Thank you.
Following my conversation with Sam, we took the opportunity to learn from our participants. So they were given the opportunity to spend some time in breakout rooms and discuss each of these elements of the trust equation in turn. They were also kind enough to share their wisdom with us afterwards, and we've summarised that here. For credibility, we have an excellent story about how a small action can make a big difference. So the conversation was about a particular event where some information from a customer had gone missing. And what had turned out was that somebody had failed to scan the second side of a page. Now, it could have been very easy at this point for the customer to become unhappy, take their business elsewhere, but the simple act of, I'm sorry, that was my fault, it shouldn't have happened, it won't happen again, turned what could have been a negative into a positive, because people were seen to be willing to be vulnerable and admit their mistakes, which increased their credibility. In terms of reliability, the team came back with 3 very good bits of advice about communication, transparency, and defining parameters. From a communication point of view, communication defines whether or not we feel people to be reliable. In many cases, it doesn't matter whether you can or you can't, but it does matter whether you tell people that you can or you can't. So giving clear, accurate communication makes a big difference to your reliability. Secondly, transparency. If you give people information that you can give them when you can give it to them, that will help build your reliability. It doesn't matter whether it's good news, bad news, intermediate news, even when handling controversial or emotionally charged topics like redundancy, if you follow the process you say you're going to follow, that's going to build your reliability. The final element of reliability is making sure that you define parameters, define boundaries within which you're going to operate. And that makes sure that we're having shared expectations, making sure that you and the person you're talking to have a shared understanding of what is and isn't available. As we move along the top of the equation, we get to intimacy. And the team for intimacy shared 3 things with us that we thought were worthwhile. First of all, consistency, making sure that the actions you take that are designed or create intimacy with others are consistent and reliable. Secondly, investment. It takes time to create an environment in which people feel that intimacy will be respected. So don't expect this stuff to happen overnight, and work out that the investment of your time will be worthwhile in the long run. The third element on intimacy was recognizing that this is about creating psychological safety for your team members and your team. And our participants were kind enough to share with us the acronym TERA, T-E-R-A, as a way of thinking about how you create that psychological safety. T is the tribe. Do we feel that we're on the same page? Do we feel we belong together? E, expectations. Have we created a common language for those expectations to be described? As we talked about with reliability, is it something that we both understand? Rank. In organisations, other people are more senior to us and more junior to us, and that plays into how people are going to feel about intimacy. Can we flatten the org structure a little bit to make it easier for that rank to disappear? And finally, autonomy. Do people feel that they have the ability to make their own decisions and make their own choices? All of these will play into how safe they feel and how their intimacy with you will increase. Finally, self-orientation. The example here was a very powerful one of a senior individual making a visit to a team. This has been in the diary for a long time, and the team were looking forward to spending time with one of their senior stakeholders. Unfortunately, on the day of the visit, a very significant issue arose that required complete attention for this person. They locked themselves in an office, and 14 hours later emerged from the office having not spent any time with the people on the ground. Everybody knew what was happening. It was a common knowledge of the incident that was being discussed. But the fact that they didn't come outside for 30 seconds just to say, everyone, you know where we are, we know what we're doing, I'm really sorry that I can't do what I wanted to do, gave people the impression that the senior person in question was not interested in everybody else. So very small thing had very big impact. Even though people intellectually understood what was happening, emotionally, that person came across as self-oriented rather than team-oriented. After the masterclass closed, a couple of our participants stayed on for a further conversation in which we explored a couple of extra elements, one of which I thought was worth sharing here. Intimacy is perhaps a word that we feel a little uncomfortable with, and it's worth perhaps substituting the word kindness in there. There's a lot of data coming out of recent neuroscience that says that when we are the recipients of kindness, we decrease our mental load. In other words, we have more mental capacity available for creativity and innovation. So being kind to people will create that level of intimacy that we need. That brings us to the end of our brief summary. So thank you, first of all, to those who were able to attend on the day. Thank you to those of you who have taken the time to download this or visit it afterwards. As you know, we run these masterclasses on a monthly basis, and thanks to signing up to this one, you'll receive invitations to all of those as we go forward. If you'd like to talk to us about any of the issues that have come up today, or indeed anything else that you think would be interesting, then do please get in touch. We'll put my QR code and Sam's on as soon as we finish this.